Now, of course, we've heard a lot already about the advances in technology and communication, and about the world that we now live in being so very different. And in fact, Ian was talking about the speed of progress and the speed of the, you'll always be able to buy something in 18 months' time that will have double the capacity that it has today for half the price. And that just gives you a snapshot of how quickly things are changing. We're going to delve a bit deeper into the changes that are going on and the opportunities that those changes do bring, but also, of course, the challenges that any change like that brings to people within this industry and to from new competitors. How should you think about your market of the future? How can you visualize it? How can you remain resilient, adapt and innovate to stay ahead, or at least not lag behind? Well, our next speaker has been invited to provide us with an insight into what Google believes a borderless world means for travel. So apologies again for messing up the schedule earlier, but please welcome, I promise this is the right speaker now, from Google, their head of travel, Ruairidh.
Thank you, Daisy. I wasn't entirely upset with the change in the schedule, but not to worry. Thanks very much for having me. It's a real pleasure. I attended my first APT conference last year and witnessed the wonderful Nishma Rob wearing some spectacular shoes. I'm sure many of you remember. And I wanted to attempt something similar. I've unfortunately just got my cowboy suede, which isn't particularly dazzling. So instead, as I embark on my interpretation on what a borderless world is, I thought I'd introduce my own favoured item in my family life, which is my son, Hugh. Hugh is the eldest of 4 young children. He's 7. He's a spirited young fellow, takes after his father. And the reason that I've introduced him is to give a little introduction. It's something that I've presented in my previous role at Google, which was working with finance brands, as to where we see a borderless world and why it's come about. Now, I'm using Hugh for a specific reason. It's because he was born on the 15th of March, 2008. And the reason that is important is because he's younger than the iPhone. Now, this is a concept that has been well talked about a number of times. The iPhone came to being in June 2007, but it wasn't so much the device, which is simple and beautiful and really changed the way that people engage with their phones, but it's the apps, the sort of evolution of the app world, which has really created a different way of interacting. The kind of apps that are now readily available that help with healthcare, keeping fit, and business problems, services, and so on. My own personal favourite was the British Gas app, believe it or not. I remember living in my previous house where to get a gas meter reading, I had to stoop below the cupboard into a darkened area of the house. And British Gas, cleverly, had brought a little torch into their app so I could easily find what I was looking for. That probably kept me with them for an additional 6 months until I really did realise they were far too expensive and changed. But it was a different way of engaging. So returning back to Hugh, he's in this world where everything is digital, everything is readily available. And he starts to question all the things that he finds around the house. Yellow pages, which is pretty much a doorstop, and a telephone that's actually connected to a socket in the wall in my home. In our house, we have this retro sort of 60s-style telephone that only gets used when I'm ordering a curry. But from my children's point of view, it is merely ornamental in the home. These things are becoming more and more, or less and less used around the house, especially for that generation. There's also certain things that he's never going to do because of the age he is and the way in which things are moving and changing so fast. He's never going to look through a paper catalogue and make a purchase. I don't think he's ever looked in a catalogue to date. He's far more astute using iPads or tablets to search for things that he's interested in. He sees a TV ad during the cartoons on a Saturday morning and immediately goes online to find out the price and try and convince me it's a worthwhile purchase. Encyclopedia Britannia. Has anybody got a collection of these in their house? I didn't think so. Oh, there is one. Well done. Well done. I remember being at school, roughly, I think it was about 1992, and suddenly, in our school library, we had Encarta. Does anybody remember Encarta? The encyclopedia on a disc. Brilliant idea, except we had a Gateway 2000 computer at home, which took about 10 minutes to load up, fumble around getting the disk out, and by the time you've actually found what you're looking for in Encarta, well, you could easily have gone to your library and found that out in a book. So it was an attempt to be disruptive, but wasn't at all. Of course, the internet that came along made all of those things superfluous, and we can find anything we want to very, very quickly at the touch of a button. And my son, Hugh, takes great glee in humiliating my wife and I on some of the things he finds lying around the house. Things like CDs, doesn't quite understand. We have a Sonos system. We have a Google Music account similar to Spotify. CDs are really a thing of the past. The same is true of DVDs. You know, we don't even have a DVD player in the house anymore. And cable internet. Now, he's probably less aware, he's only 7, on the difference between Wi-Fi and cable internet, but certainly he never sees devices around the household that are connected with a cable. He doesn't really understand what the point in that is. And by the time he's, you know, an adult and has his own home, of course, cables will probably be completely out of the picture. And the last one, which is quite interesting, the Radio Times. You know, we all remember with great glee the 2-week edition of the Radio Times that comes out pre-Christmas, and we'd scour through, plotting our holiday break around Santa Claus the movie, The Great Escape, and whichever Bond film happens to be rolled out that period. I actually had a hotel stay with Hugh some months ago, and we got into the room, and I was getting changed, and my wife was getting changed, and he was getting ready for bed. I put the TV on just to see if there was anything worth watching, and Hugh said, can we just watch Adventure Time? Which, for those of you with young children might know, is a rather bizarre cartoon that seems to be very popular. And I said, well, I don't think it's on, Hugh. I don't think Adventure Time's on at this time in the evening. And he could not, he'd never really got to grips with scheduled TV. He's had Netflix at home, and downloading movies from Google Play Store, anything like that, was completely, he couldn't get to grips with. And I think he started to realize that we lived in bleak times growing up in the 80s and the 90s as I did. So ultimately, all of these are bringing together this feeling that was well presented in the last 2 sessions around things moving much more quickly. You know, businesses are susceptible to be too slow if they do not get to grips with the change in generation, the change in consumption, and the way in which people are interacting with services and products around the world, or certainly in market. Blockbuster is a great example of that. You know, I'm the youngest of 4 brothers, so you can imagine the battles we'd have going down to the Blockbuster store to see who actually got to choose the movie for a Saturday evening. It wasn't pretty. I always lost. But that experience was all part of renting a movie. It wasn't just the sitting down to watch. It was going to the store, choosing, buying your popcorn, buying your drinks. That was very much part of the experience. That experience no longer exists. We're moving to a point where actually anticipation is disappearing because we want instant gratification. And of course, this leads me on, for the astute amongst you, to another example, which is, of course, Borders. Now, Borders similarly didn't move fast enough. They didn't get to grips with the launch of ebooks and devices for reading books, and as a result, they suffered the rather brutal consequences. And so this is really my introduction to what a business in a borderless world can look like. It's for us, from a Google view, it is represented by businesses needing to move fast, needing to understand technology available, and needing to be agile enough to get to grips with that. So I thought I'd start by representing what I feel is a borderless world. And given that we are amongst very, very experienced people in the travel industry, I thought I'd just throw out to the audience the question, can anybody tell me which island this is? That is abysmal. It is, in fact, the ultimate in a borderless world. It's a view of Pangaea. So this is what the world looked like before the breakup of the continents and before the lands were separated, and ultimately before borders were really created. And I thought that actually the Pangaea view was quite a nice representation of the internet. The internet is, of course, a place we can all go to where borders don't exist. You can get any information, look at any service, any product, at the touch of a button without having to cross any borders at all. And I thought that Pangaea really did represent exactly what the internet has come to mean for all of us. And ultimately, the internet is borderless, and that can be represented through e-commerce sales. 2014, globally, $1.5 trillion through e-commerce channels. By 2016, $2 trillion. By 2018, $2.5 trillion. It is exceptional change and huge growth. And so the opportunity through e-commerce channels is really unfounded, and it's really a place where borders don't exist. But you have to understand what the borders are to ensure that you're nimble enough not to suffer as Borders and Blockbusters did. So I've broken down into sort of 4 areas of discussion for this morning, or ultimately this afternoon now, how businesses can adapt to break down these borders. And the first one is agility. It is absolutely essential that as a business you're set up to be agile and move with technological change and innovation and have that kind of spirit in mind. Clarity. Clarity is, by which I mean clarity of audience. So at Google, we very much talk about audiences as the first and most important goal for any business. So understanding who your audience is and how you can connect is incredibly important. Currency. So traditionally, currency would always be a border to entry for a business going into a new market, or for a consumer purchasing or traveling into a new market as well. And finally, technology, which is obviously the area that Google spends most of its time developing in and helping customers through technology to make the most of the internet and this borderless world. So to begin with agility, an example here, eBay and Amazon as 2 relatively well-known digital companies who in a very short space of time, less than 5 years, were able to overtake the likes of Walmart in internationalization. You know, some of these businesses on the slide here are, you know, years and years and years old, and yet in such a short space of time, these digital companies have been able to absolutely dominate in the retail space. But Asia is leading the way. Asia is an interesting market. So from 2015, you can see here the kind of the growth numbers in dollar sales, and actually by 2017, Asia will be the first region to exceed $1 trillion all by itself. And this is driven by a particular type of spirit, a particular type of a certain type of spirit that will essentially be explained through this video, which is of Jack Ma. So for those that don't know who Jack Ma is, he is the founder of Alibaba.
They called him Crazy Jack.
Can you see why people think it's so much hot air? You don't make any money. You've got extraordinary claims, and yet you make nothing.
But for 8 wild years, I called this former English teacher boss.
Hey, Jack, you're here.
In 1995, he started China's first internet company.
我可以建立一个中国最大的国际信息库。
你要不约的话呢，很难给你做一个很满意的回答。
I decided to join his revolution and saw behind the scenes of a rising China. The road was never easy, and many mistakes were made along the way, but it was always an adventure.
我们所有的竞争对手不在于中国，而在于美国的硅谷。我们在座的所有的人的脑袋绝不比他们来长。
How are you going to grow in the face of an established company like eBay coming out with its Chinese language site?
We will win. We will make it because we are young and we never give up.
It is official. Yahoo agreed to pay $1 billion in cash for a 40% stake in Alibaba.com. The move is designed to catch up with eBay.
China is open the door. And internet is the best way to let the people understand what's happening outside.
This is the story, in my own words and in the most honest way possible, of what I saw and what I learned at the front lines of a revolution half a world away.
世界给了我们这个舞台，全球给了我们这个机会，为11亿人提供真正价廉物美的平台。谢谢大家。
So I strongly recommend actually watching that documentary. It is fascinating to see how a business started by an English school teacher has grown in such an exponential way. And there's a passage in there where he's talking to the first team of people in what looks like a sort of a staff room, potentially at his school. I'm not sure where it is. And there are two things that stand out. One, that he said, in order for success, we can't start serving the Chinese people. Right from the beginning, his ambition was to be a global enterprise, a global business. You can see that with the statement of wanting to serve a billion people. And the other thing was what he defined as the Silicon Valley spirit. He said that his competitors are those businesses set up in Silicon Valley, much like Google, and actually they cannot survive or win if they have an 8 till 5 o'clock mentality, which I thought was kind of interesting because I certainly don't start at 8, but I do stay until at least 5:30. But that is the kind of spirit he was trying to instill, and I think that their success is demonstrated in a pretty clear way. So moving on then to clarity, and as I described earlier, clarity of audience, understanding who your audience is, and this is absolutely critical so that there are no wasted marketing dollars and you're speaking in the right tone at the right time to those people that matter to you, your customers. So you have to understand what the size of the opportunity is. Now this is a rather sort of gross illustration showing that there will be 130 billion of forecast e-commerce by 2020. So for you and your business, you need to understand what size of that pie is actually available to you and that you can grab. To take advantage of examples like this, where 48% of UK shoppers have purchased overseas because they're able, through the internet, through that borderless phenomenon, to find potentially better product at better price. And they're not bothered about the amount of time it takes to deliver because they're able to see very quickly, at the click of a button, better value for their money. And understanding how connected our consumers are. So this was alluded to earlier. Forgive me if you can't see the digits clearly, but the green area for Germany, Italy, the Netherlands, and the UK is showing the amount of people with 3 devices. So individual people with 3 devices, which I thought was staggering till I counted my own. And it wasn't until I bought this pointless piece of junk on my wrist that I realized I have 4. But essentially, people are interacting and consuming information and looking at products and services now in a very different way across multiple devices. And you need to understand that in order to speak to them in the right manner. But it's tricky because, oops, sorry, let me just click through. It is tricky because it's very easy to get it wrong. Where there are multiple devices, it's easy to be going that step a little bit too far.
On the phone, you said that you contact her all day?
I don't contact her all day. You know, maybe just a couple of times in the morning, and then when she's at lunch, and then sometimes when she's shopping and sleeping. I just really want to be close to her all the time.
When you say all the time,
Like nothing too serious. You know, like a casual tweet, a bit of PPC action, retargeting, that sort of thing. About 6 or 8 times a day. Maybe 10. Let's say 10 to 20 times a day. Just.
how do you think that makes her feel? I mean, has she ever said she likes it?
Well, not exactly, but I just think she's playing hard to get. You know, she just hasn't quite followed through lately, if you know what I mean.
Followed through?
Paid for me, ordered me, booked me, put me in a basket. She actually unfollowed me on Facebook the other day, which was harsh. It's all part of the game though, right?
Come on!
So quite an interesting way to represent the technology that's available through marketing and so on, but the number of devices does make it really difficult for us to communicate at just the right amount of times a day, or maybe a week, in order to get it right and get the message across to your customers. Automation is key. So at Google, we have a suite of platforms under the DoubleClick brand, which is an example of programmatic advertising, something that's a growing phenomenon in the ad space. Some of you, I'm sure, are aware of and are taking advantage of. It allows you much better targeting through time of day, geography, device targeting, operating system, because there's obviously now a variety of operating systems, and ultimately making sure that you are using the absolutely right ad slot and hitting your customer in the way that they actually want to be hit, rather than in that rather seedy fashion that was demonstrated in the video. It's also critical that you do the research. Now, I can remember as a student walking down the high street in Canterbury, which is near where I live, and being stopped by a market researcher in the street who asked me to come and taste a new Alco Pop. Now, being an 18-year-old, I jumped at the chance, drank the drink, didn't particularly like it, and was then asked to fill out a 30-question survey. So my friend and I promptly got up and left and thanked them for the free drink. But these kind of market research on the high street, through mail drops, through direct mail, you know, it's costly, you have to do it in particular markets, and it takes a long time to then collate all the information and bring it back to any sort of meanable use. Through the internet and through digital channels, you can actually do this much more easily. So our example are Google consumer surveys. There's a variety of examples around where you can very quickly deliver a list of questions targeted to people who have potentially seen your ad, responded with your ad, get an understanding on what they feel, what the ad recall is, or just general market research to specific consumer sets or audience sets that you feel you want to make sure you fully understand. You can do that in a day, get the results back, and it's all automatically collated, so you can actually act with immediate effect. And then there's the borders to pay. So this is really talking about the currency issue across geographies, but also the manner in which people want to pay. So I firmly believe if you put the consumer at the heart of this decision, rather than the costs impacting your business, hopefully you can find a way to make this much more useful to your business. So an example here, these are crude figures just demonstrating that regionally across different parts of the world, there are different preferences to the way people actually want to pay for goods, products, or services. Invoices versus credit cards, cash on delivery, click and collect, which is now prevalent, all these kind of pay preferences. It's really putting the consumer first. And if you can understand your audience and what they want to do and model your business to work in such a way, then surely that leads to greater success. Some examples of how we do this. So we have launched earlier this year app deep linking, which ultimately means directly from an ad delivered across the internet, rather than having to click to a mobile site or a website on a desktop, go through the process of entering all your details and so on. You can deep link directly from the ad into an app. So the phone will know if you've got the app already, and it will deep link directly there. So you've got the product listed, and within an app, if it's on your phone, there's a very strong likelihood that all of your paid credentials are already entered. So again, at just a small number of clicks, you can make your purchase. Makes life a lot easier for the consumer and puts you much more quickly into their mindset and desires. Removing payment borders. So one of the big issues is, of course, when you're a single purchase per year, which the holidays market is obviously prevalent to, how do you encourage people to pay for you on a device that is their choice? So we know that mobiles are a growing phenomenon. So we launched Android Pay, which is much like Apple Pay or PayPal, the sort of multiple payment centers that you can actually apply to a number of propositions. And Android Pay is an API, so again, it's built into your app proposition, but also in store, if you have a high street presence, you can use the app with Android Pay to pay directly through near-field communications in store, much like a contactless payment card today. And then purchases on Google. Now, this is an example in our retail space. So we have a proposition called vertical search. You'll all be familiar with our flight search proposition and hotel finder proposition. In the retail space, we have something similar, Google Shopping, where now you can find the product you want through Google Shopping and pay in the Google interface. So again, bringing your consumers closer to the product and service they actually want to purchase without sort of removing many of those borders to purchase by limiting the journey. And the final area is technology. And it's a bit of a cheat when I talk about technology because there's vast amounts of platforms and technology services available, but actually the reason I wanted to bring this section is ultimately talking about mobile. Now, those of you in the audience who are customers of ours, for myself or anyone in my team, will probably have been fed up to the back teeth with us banging on about mobile. I've been at Google for just over 4 years, and 4 times I've experienced the year of mobile. But it's true, and using Alibaba again as the example, we have 40% of GMV mobile, and I have a note here to remind me, gross merchandise value, not familiar with the retail terminology, but 40% over 2 years has been delivered through mobile channels for them, where a year ago it was just 10%. So the growth through mobile channels for them is incredible and significant by making that journey that much easier. The number of enabled devices, again, connected devices is a critical statistic. You can see the red line towards the left-hand side there is the UK, where the average is 3 devices per person. Again, it's a significant importance to understand that mobile devices are the consumer choice. So if you're not allowing that experience or taking into account, it's a bit like shutting the door to 50% of the customers walking down the high street. None of you would do that. So make sure you don't do that with mobile as well. There's a credible audience and an awful lot of traffic being delivered through mobile channels. You can see here, this is Google search query data, specifically for the travel sector, and it's fairly clear that tablets that were, at the time of launch, 2011, when the iPad first came out, the fastest growing device ever, and I think that most of us thought was going to be another huge change in the way that information is consumed and products and services are found. In actual fact, that's plateaued. And whether that's to do with Wi-Fi enabled devices versus 3G devices, and so actually more tablets are used in the home where you've got the choice of desktop as well as mobile. Actually, the real growth driver is only through the mobile device, the smartphone. And you can see that is very, very clearly going to surpass desktop very soon. So again, that shift to mobile and making sure that you are really meeting the mobile requirement is absolutely key to speak to your consumers in the way that they choose. But it's not easy. So take the Nordics as an example. Across the whole of the Nordic region, there's more than 90% of individuals with smartphones, and that's really high comparative to other parts of the world. But it doesn't necessarily mean that you can make a decision for the whole region. Finland, 75% of the Finnish population still prefer to access social media through their desktop. So it's important, again, going back to that consumer surveys and understanding your audience, that you can't just understand exactly how people want to consume by the devices they've got. You really have to do the underlying research as well to understand that market. And then there's the link from digital to offline, and this is critical, and this is something that I know some of you are astutely aware of and doing an awful lot of research to understand that connection between mobile and offline in this instance being a high street presence, where 80% of searches on mobile are actually with local intent, looking for local products and services. 50% actually then visit a high street store or proposition like a bank or travel agent, and 18% make a purchase. So there's a direct correlation, but actually how do we ensure that we understand which portion is doing that interaction? So Google's launched a proposition called Beacons, which we've rolled out with a number of you in the audience today, actually, where a Wi-Fi beacon is placed in stores, in travel agents, and it directly correlates those who have searched for your proposition on mobile, then entered your store, and you can understand then the attribution between the mobile part of the journey and what's actually happening in your store for sales. So the last video I've got, it's a short one. It's not meant to be a Google plug, but it's quite hard to get case studies from our competitors, so forgive me for that. But this is an example of a business that has taken everything I've talked about into account and really gone global very quickly and made a success through that borderless world that is the internet and digital. You will have to pay attention because it's subtitled, but I promise you it is very short.
Ik ben Steven Boeles, medeoprichter van Bona. We zijn een Belgisch online diamantjuweelmerk. We zijn in 2008 gestart met 2 personen vanuit Antwerpen. Ondertussen hebben we ook kantoren in Parijs, in Genève, in Hongkong. We verkopen ondertussen 85% buiten België, in meer dan 40 landen. En we blijven continu de groei van meer dan 50% per jaar waarmaken. Ik heb altijd een heel groot interesse gehad in producten van een hoge kwaliteit, waar mensen op een ambachtelijke manier tijdloze producten konden van maken. Ik vind het persoonlijk heel leuk om te weten dat we met producten werken die 100% ethisch worden gesourced en verhandeld. We gebruiken eigenlijk alle Google tools, gaande van Google AdWords, Analytics, YouTube en zo verder. Sommige zijn eerder om het brand te beelden, andere zijn eigenlijk om te kijken wie hier momenteel koopt en wie we nog kunnen bereiken om potentieel te kopen bij ons in de toekomst. Elk land, elke cultuur heeft zijn eigen voorkeuren, ook op het gebied van diamanten. Je moet die culturen kennen om een juist productaanbod te geven per land. We hebben de website in 7 talen vertaald en dat zorgt enkel voor een hogere conversie als mensen in hun eigen taal worden geholpen. Het is eigenlijk onze bedoeling om een sterk online merk te bouwen, bijvoorbeeld door onze website nog geschikter te maken voor mobile, omdat uiteindelijk de consument ook meer mobile wordt. We willen continu verder groeien, bijvoorbeeld door nieuwe talen toe te voegen. Volgend jaar willen we bijvoorbeeld Japans toevoegen als nieuwe taal. Ondertussen zijn we er al gestart aan de voorbereidingen. Het vergt natuurlijk wat tijd. Je doet dat niet van vandaag op morgen, maar stap voor stap gaan we wel die richting uit.
Sorry. And so I just wanted to finish off by returning to Hugh, that handsome chap in the corner, because it's quite important to understand, why is Hugh the person who is immersed in all this digital? Yeah, okay, it's partly because of his age and the fact that he was born after the iPhone and everything has changed since then. But ultimately, he is still only 7. He's not gone out and purchased an iPhone. He's not the one who's put Sonos in the house, got a Chromecast, signed up to Netflix, all these things that has changed the way he's consuming so that he's unaware of everything before. It's because that's what I've done. That's what my wife has done. And people of my generation and all of us who are actually driving this technological consumption shift. So yes, we have to be mindful of this generation who will be buying holidays in 10 years' time, but actually that time is now. It's really important. And whilst Hugh hopefully will be an early adopter like I have been, ultimately we have to act now and get on board with the technological change. As for Hugh, he will be onto all kinds of different technology and devices that we aren't even aware of, and I'm sure he'll be an early adopter as I am. After all, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. Thank you very much.